Alrighty. This is a point when I'm supposed to be using a clever quote. So you have no reference. Blew it. Take two. So Donnie, you have no frame of reference here. You're like a child wandering into a movie theater. All right, so I'm Jonathan Albin, and this is NycosRPG, and that quote came from The Big Lebowski. Bonus points if you happen to know who the character was that I'm portraying there, and if it means you have to watch the whole movie, so be it. Hey, today we're going to be talking about mastering RPG development and in particular advanced strategies and techniques to do so. It is Nycos Stores Day, so I have to draw attention to our greatest and most ardent retail supporter at this point, and that is Board Game Paradise. We operate games there on Mondays and Tuesdays each week, and we are going to be continuing to do so into the future, Mondays and Tuesdays from 6 p.m. until 10 p.m. And on Saturdays, we do role-play roulette, specifically from 2 o'clock until 6 p.m. Saturdays, all those times are in Pacific time zone. So if you can, make it to Board Games Paradise. It's in Redlands, California. I'd love to have you there. And if you enter the store, make sure you let them know that you heard about it on our NycosRPG. Alrighty, so as we get ready to go into this, I do have to do my usual song and dance. And today in particular, with this being nearing the end of the month of October, we do have a very special event next Wednesday, the 30th, starting at about 6 p.m. We're going to be doing a Monster Bash. There is a entry fee for participation, but it is literally going to be keep what you kill in terms of a miniature. You will receive a free miniature, the biggest miniature you defeat in combat in that game session. It's going to be a brawl. It's going to be fast to learn. So if you've never played any role-playing games at all, you can still be a part of that and take home a prize no matter what. So make sure that you check out Board Games Paradise, and for more information, do check out their website, boardgameparadise.com, and also additional information about Nycos will be at NycosRPG.com. Alrighty, so now that we've done that, we can move on. So, when we talk about mastering RPGs, we really have to talk about a bunch of different categories, and I'm going to try to insert chapter headers before each one of these so that you'll be able to find them quicker and to clarify which one is which. So at this point, I'm giving you the entire list so you kind of have a headline of what we're going over, and realize that the most important part will be the debriefing and feedback at the bottom. So make sure you watch through to the end. Also, there will be an Easter egg and benefit to those members of my playing community, whether you're playing in one of my online groups or the live games at the Board Games Paradise store. And also, there is a new event that's just started this last week on Roleplay Roulette. Make sure you check out the video about that from last week, Saturday. It was crazy. So we will be doing that again, in theory, on this Saturday. So the online community, those of you that are watching this on YouTube, can actually participate. If you find that video, you can actually give me input as to what you would do within that story, and there'll be so much more coming for you, so to speak, as we head into these. So the first thing we're going to talk about, let me go ahead and do the setup for the chapters. So give me a second to blot out all the others. Well, that's interesting. That's why. That'll be confusing as all get out. Pardon me. I know this is Twitch, so the video will be curtailed considerably when we get into it. So I wanted to get this set up for chapter 1. Let me do a little quick change-a-roo here. Almost there. Almost there. Stay on target. Alrighty. So, Chapter 1. Characters versus personae. I have to ask a question before we begin, and that is, which of these do you consider to be a better or more fully developed RPG character? A 20th level character with 16 levels of paladin, 4 levels of rogue, who has followed a path towards achieving their objective of becoming the champion of the downtrodden of a major city, or an individual who started his life working the low streets of Tenerife, knowing he's got 3 or 4 brothers and sisters still milling about within the city but hasn't been able to see them because of complications in their family dynamic, who has a strident desire to give up on his life of debauchery and to pursue a more righteous life, and entering into a commitment to become a storied and dedicated member of the Order of Medicians. The reason why I ask this question is that when we speak of role-play character, RPG character development, there's really 2 perspective positions you can come from. Of course, arguably, there could be an infinite number of these, but in particular, I'm asking about which of them has a better character development. And some people would perceive of their development being how well they were able to pursue the objectives that they set for themselves in the frame of reference of the game that they are playing, how many levels of progression, how many feats and skills they've specifically taken that have provided them specific moderate dice rolls across all the spectrums, and is really more of a concern of how effective they are in their role in the story. While the other option would be to actually perceive of that character in terms of a persona, a personality that they themselves have undertaken and are striving to accomplish in a day-to-day way, so that they are actually in themselves sort of becoming a better example of the persona that they've built. They're trying to inhabit that skin and live as close to the storyline truth that they've developed. I would say, obviously, I'm rather partial to the secondary course rather than the primary course, mainly because with 50 years of experience as a game master, I have seen it all in terms of the production of optimization within a character and making sure that you have numbers that support the adventuring group, that you have best understanding of what the purpose is of the group and the like, but there's really no specific identity, if you will, to this personality. He's a flat number on a character sheet. He is a series of modifiers, pluses and minuses, that mostly pluses now in 5th edition, that provide the optimization of their skills in game and really have very little to do with the player. I much prefer the second option, where you're actually developing the personality and the identity of the character that you're portraying, but you are doing so in such a fashion that the numbers on the page don't tell enough of the story and are not the only things that matter. In terms of advanced strategies under this category, certainly reading the materials in the role-playing guides of that particular game will definitely help you to be an advanced character, and you definitely want to look for information, perhaps even going to the webs to find out what is optimal for that persona, that character, and trying to figure out the precise place to change level for level to gain the optimal advantages you're looking for. In the case of a persona, simply considering what skills you develop, which direction you want to take the persona, and dedicating yourself to maintaining advancement of those skills week over week are the way you would develop that persona, much as in our own lives, if we want to become better at a skill, better at a job, we work on the particular skills that will help to make that job easier and that we get better at them. Chapter 2, Development versus Progress. When we think of character development, most of us who have a role-playing background automatically think of what we gain in terms of level advancements, skills that those level advances represent. In later levels, the actual changing of our attributes by the benefits of points we can add to them, or the increasing number of potential feats we might add. And an advanced strategy would be to have a very serious understanding of the mechanics of the game in which you're playing so that you can grab those skills that you need and to make those level changes at the right time to get the best synergy between the classes that you're playing. This is not, to me, when you talk about character development, this is not really what we're referring to. Instead, that would be looking at the progress of a persona. That would be the progress of the character. And developing and advancing progress really does depend on what the game master has presented in terms of the challenges and difficulties that you face, whether it be the DC of the monsters that you wish to engage with, or the amount of experience points earned by dramatic roleplay if they have such a thing. But this progress isn't really the development of a character. You're not creating what I call dimension. You're not creating space between the character that you're playing and yourself. You're cutting off, literally cut off your nose to spite your face in this case, because when you are pursuing progress, you are automatically shifting your mindset out of the role of the character, and instead you are looking at outside references and superimposing them on the character itself. And by doing so, you are radically restricting the possible progress that might be made in that character if that were not your focus. Now, in many games, that's exactly what the game master is expecting and wants. But in terms of actual development of the character, it is a far cry from actual development. The idea of creating a third dimension within your character or building out the reality, this really has to come from the idea of wishing to develop. In other words, not just thinking about what your character's role is in the story and how better to provide that group service, but also to look at what is the purpose for being there. I remember in my youth, I used to get so frustrated with the players who would use this very line. They would say something along the lines of, yeah, but what's my motivation? Why would I want to do this? If you are a persona, if you are building your character in such a way that you're breathing life into it, you don't have to ask that question, because you can look at the scenario that is developing and actually build out for yourself what that persona advancement really looks like. And by having an understanding of the persona you're building, this idea of developing the persona becomes second nature. You want to understand why you're doing what you're doing and how that affects others in the game. One of the key elements of this is to ask yourself constantly the question, and this is really, I guess you'd say, one of the major strategies of playing a persona in a game, whether it be a character or, as I call them, a persona. why are you doing this particular thing? What is it that is driving you? Are you accomplishing it within the, as Monty Python would say, what is your idiom? What is your methodology? In terms of techniques, a character can build into their system the techniques by describing their actions, not only in terms of what you accomplished, but why and how it was accomplished. Perhaps giving nuances of the background of the persona in the way you respond, and to literally try to inhabit the role. Chapter 3, a matter of dimension. When we are playing a persona, or a character, however you want to call it, I'm going to use the word persona most of the time because that's what I become adept at, but it's a matter of dimension. If you sit down with your two-dimensional character and you already have an idea of how they're going to be, well, maybe that's a speech inflection. It doesn't have to be. In many games, you'll have arguably great character actors who fulfill their role within the game in a very flat way by responding just with their actions instead of building in this other dimension. So when I speak of one of the strategies of having dimension added to your character is to describe your action as precisely as you can, bringing into it the parts of your persona, parts of that being that you are playing into that description. So, for example, if you are concerned, then of course you could say, I'm moving at stealth speed across this place because I'm, but you don't say anything other than that, just I'm moving across the space. But instead, if you said, I'm moving with caution and trepidation because I remember the time several decades ago when this horrible thing happened, and I'm trying to make sure this doesn't happen to me again. It reminds me of what happened to my brother. And you build into the character your dimension. You're adding that, it's like you're pumping up or filling out that role with yourself. And you are literally envisioning and perceiving and presenting your actions as if you were actually in that scene. This literally tends to lower you into the scene. It connects you with your persona more deeply, and it makes the actions that you do make sense within the story, and also creates for other players the same level of intensity as the game master is doing with his descriptive processes. Now, if you are in a game where the game master is still playing flat two-dimensional, you may toss him for the loop, so make sure you use proper terminology so he understands. So in that case, as you say you're trepidatious and you're nervous and you're crossing the room cautiously, go ahead and mention that means I'll be moving at stealth speed instead of full speed as I cross. It's not that you're being stealthy, it's that you are moving at the speed that the rules can accommodate. And that's really important because you have to be able to speak the game master's language while also developing the persona. Those of you that are big time role players and you want to actually experience more deeply the scene, always try to think and see through the eyes of that persona that you're playing. If you are a nervous Nelly anyway, playing such a role, make sure your speech pattern may even be hesitant and cautious so that they catch that it's not just what you're doing, but it's how that persona is thinking about the scene. And that adds the level of development. Now, that may not work in the larger scale because character development is more than just narrative flavor. But the flavoring of the persona helps to develop what the character is beyond what you see on the page. And it means that you're getting to know that persona, that character you're trying to portray, more deeply, and therefore you're adding to or amplifying the effects that the storyteller has already brought to the table. So utilizing such terminology may or may not fit the specifics of the character that you're playing, but it does give you the opportunity to expand and expound the very background and personality that you are playing. Which, fundamentally, when I speak of mastering character development, sure, in the case of a mechanism like, for example, Dungeons and Dragons that has an experience points pool and you have to wait for the game master's investment, make sure that your narrative portrays how you're feeling as well, because that gives the other players a leg to stand on for their interactions, which will bring more realism to your tabletop and in some ways help your character to develop simply because you're overcoming your fears. And these are things that you've written into what you're intending to do. So it makes the story make more sense. Now, this process of becoming the persona in terms of role play really is like an exercise in theatrics. You are wanting to work on your internalization. Those things that happened to your persona are a factor of how much you are inserted into the scene, so that if there is terror, you're reacting with the appropriate emotional response. If you have built a persona that has a high tolerance for danger and threat, then perhaps you're going to be acting more bravely and your speech pattern will be more strongly represented. And if you start with an idea of what your persona is and you see where that persona might progress, even if you've done so by the meta, you've actually figured out where those level advances are, to be a better role player, you really need to be able to be that persona while in game. And so there are some things that you can do in terms of internalization exercises. So let me give you a couple of examples. One of the greatest internalization exercises is to work on in-game speaking as the persona as often as you can. Now, granted, when you are dealing with a meta situation where you're only describing physically moving from point A to point B, perhaps you're not going to fall into persona for that. However, if you are, you're thinking in character that I need to let others know what I'm doing, then utilizing the in-character personality you've built and that you've been fleshing out, you can say, guys, I'm going to go check this out, but I'm really not sure what we're going to be facing up against. So get your weapons prepared, and I'm going to go scout out the position. Wait here until I give you the sign. That way, when you give them the narrative of I'm moving from point A to point B, they understand the very methodology. And again, utilizing proper words in game for the game master to comprehend what it is you're trying to do really does help. But this speaking in the role really helps to bring you down to that tabletop level. As a matter of fact, one of the exercises that I almost mandate to my player groups is that when they are describing their actions in a game, I need to hear any narrative that they speak in the first person, and also that the actions can be described personally. In other words, not just that my character, the 16th level paladin, 4th level rogue, is going to use the stealth capability to sneak across the space, but more along the lines of I am going to cross that space. I'm going to give a narrative. Let me give that in a moment. But I'm going to be crossing the space in front of the group in advance, raising my hand to let them know to hold their positions. By speaking in that first person, by speaking inside the scene, you create a deeper level of understanding of who your persona is. And this internalization also will then lend to your own persona's advancement along whatever course you've set for yourself, whatever you see yourself doing. In other words, if you are working on your stealth skills, even though you've left those levels long ago and you're now working on your paladin and you've already accomplished the first levels of rogue like you wanted to, nonetheless, this idea of internalizing and acting as if you have those skills allows for the other players to also feel drawn into the scene and become part of that communication as well. A second internalization exercise is to learn descriptive terms that are appropriate for the persona that you're playing. So as I am, moving forward and I'm going to represent that I'm bravely checking out the door, my physical actions in the game, the motioning of my hand, the drawing forth of conversation by using nonverbal communication really does help, because it shows that you are in that role. You're not looking down from above. If you are a person who is into the progress angle and you're building and developing a character, certainly mathematically, analytically describe what you're going to do. But if you're trying to actually deal with the actual character development, the actual depth of the persona that you're playing, you'll definitely want to speak in this first person methodology, and these internalization exercises will really help you to accomplish that. Chapter 5, Intended Realization of the Game, Realism of the Game. Let me say that again. Intended realism of the game. If you are playing a role-playing game, Dungeons and Dragons, or name other mechanism here, the purpose for role-playing that you bring to the table will affect the way the others play, and will also reflect what it is you're trying to get from that game experience. If you are intending, if your purpose is to intentionally make the game as realistic as possible, then you're going to focus your narrative. And if you're the game master and you are intending for there to be realism, this is going to be a real help. And so utilizing this concept of intended realism means that you're going to be more responsive on a quicker level to a player's actions if they are uncharacteristic or not in keeping with the persona that they've portrayed. A great example of this is if you created a dark and stormy night story and your group is moving into a unfamiliar terrain. If an individual player says, I'm running screaming into the dark wielding my weapon and fundamentally becoming a Leroy Jenkins, then your duty with intended realism is to ask that player if that's really what they're wanting to do. Now, in my game, it's become a code phrase. I simply look at the person and say, are you sure you want to do that? Because I do grant that occasionally a player will lose their mind. They simply will decide they want to do something crazy. And sometimes they do this without considering where they are in the story, how serious the campaign is, and such like. And so by offering them a gentle nudge to verify, you actually give them the opportunity to perhaps dial that back a little or adjust it. It isn't meant as a judgmental. It's not like I'm looking over my glasses saying, you sure? Because that's a bad thing. Instead, it's, okay, are you sure you want to do that? And the intended realism of your game will really adjust that. So if you are playing a very campy, very silly encounter or series of engagements that are meant to be wacky, then you would not have to worry about that. But if the story is intentionally deeper and darker, make sure that you give the players an opportunity. This technique of questioning their decisions isn't meant to deprive them of agency. As a matter of fact, I'm perfectly fine with the fact that they're going to do this crazy action. But it will have consequences on the rest of the gaming group if they do accomplish what they're trying to do, if it is literally off the charts. So make sure that you are invoking your intended realism, perhaps in a session 0, or at least during the game session, to let them know that this is, a darker, more dangerous place. This need for an intended realism also plays into the persona, because then the player will take his cues from that and then consider his advancement in story in the frame of reference. So, for example, if his skill is he wants to use his charge function, this may not be the best place for that advancement to occur. But you can see how perhaps that's really what they're trying to do. And so by asking, are you sure you want to do that? You're giving them the opportunity to adjust it to be more appropriate, or to perhaps hold off on that action altogether and change their actual response. Come say, come saw. It may work good. It may be bad for the adventuring group. But if you've invoked a level of intended realism into the game, then the players are going to respond in kind, and that will bring up the direction of your persona's character development within game. Before we get into that, I do want to take a moment and thank those participants who have been watching my videos. I would highly recommend that you take a look at the How to Play NycosRPG series. There's a playlist that includes, I think, 16 or 17 or 18 videos that, while each individual one is a part of the NycosRPG, there are a couple that are the quick, fast play versions that get you up to speed. Also realize that there is available at NycosRPG a download of that very important master book, Quick Play, so you can literally start building your persona right away. More information on that, check out NycosRPG, and now let's get back to our show. Chapter 6, Memories versus Backstory. The very mechanism that a game master almost requires to start a persona in a game is a where did they come from moment. You have to determine where, what culture they're from, what their background is like, what their agenda is, what they're doing there in the scene. And this can be done a couple of different ways, actually, arguably, probably a million different ways, because there's a million different game masters out there. But I want to focus on two possibilities. The first one is much more of the progress line. So in other words, if you're building your character and you're wanting to progress it as quickly as possible, you will have optimized a perfect backstory to get your optimal number of benefits right off the get-go. This, in a role-playing game like Dungeons & Dragons, is essential to defining who the character is. Now, it's done so in a way so that you're creating a little bit of story in the process, but it is pretty wide open to player interpretation. And because of that, a backstory can be both really useful or horribly devastating to a game master's ability to include or engage a player in a scene. If you look at that backstory instead as the collected memories of the persona, then you simply allow them to build their backstory as what they perceive, and then you can, by suggesting their memories might be faulty, by adding opportunities for them to check against, say, their wisdom or maybe even their intellect to decide whether or not they remember the details of a situation accurately. In the realm of the world of NycosRPG, you can actually build this into the system by utilizing the injunction. It's instrumental in playing the NycosRPG that you build in the very mechanism for the persona to literally not have any of their memories initially. The system is somewhat akin to the concept of the motion picture Avatar, where you're slipping into a role of which you know very little of the backstory, but you have the physical manifestation in the physical body of someone, and therefore constantly have an access to those memories. And therefore, those can be adjusted or fallible or whatever, because it's something that was collaboratively built between the game master and the player. Furthermore, this is a great way to expand your character's development, your persona's development in game, because you can invoke what you might find in terms of your memories, or you may find that you are drawing a complete blank on a particular subject, which itself adds to the persona's understanding of themselves. This creates and amplifies that concept of dimension. When I speak of dimension, again, I'm not talking about another place and time, but I'm saying that the information that the persona has to work with is indicative of what they actually know and have developed about their persona, and therefore gives them a place to build their richness. They may have determined that they have a fear of snakes, and you have fomented that in a story or two, and now they're wanting to remember why they're afraid of snakes. And so you'll have another opportunity to perhaps role play a section of that memory, because it's one of the mechanisms of NycosRPG that you can actually do a vignette of that scene from the past in the real time by having players that are sitting at the table take on alternate roles in the scene, and thereby gain for that player a deeper understanding of what they remember. This concept of memories then adds incredibly to the player's appreciation of the game, because they are literally reminded of things that they personally were not there for. These could be pieces of evidence from years before they actually filled out the role. Maybe it's their persona at a younger point in development before the player steps in. Because remember, their persona is a being that actually exists and embraces the concept of the imprinting or overtaking by the player's persona over the top of them. And so therefore maybe they're willingly sharing information as well. Ultimately, the best exercise for utilizing this memory is to say something along the lines of, if I recall correctly, the problem with the snake had something to do with the village of Devonshire. Making that up totally. Then the game master can go, oh, yeah, let's go ahead and see whether or not you remember what happened in Devonshire. And as the player is determining by dice roll whether or not they've got access to those memories, the game master can already be chewing on what that scene might have looked like, and therefore be able to retroactively build that scene so that it's functional retcon. It's actually adding to the story tiny pieces of other stories called vignettes that amplify the overall effect. So perhaps we do find out that, yes, when you were younger, you stepped in front of a serpent and protected your kin, and while you were very scared, you got away with your skin. Or maybe you didn't. Maybe you were actually bit by the snake, and therefore you've got this fear of the actual engagement with the serpent. Either which way, these memories exercises expand the development of your persona, your character, in ways that other roleplay games can't. Chapter 6, Diaries, Journal, or Notes. When you are a game master, it's important for you to, of course, to have notes on what's going on in a scene. But the persona, since it's their experience that matters, might perceive of it very differently. And by giving them the opportunity to keep track of the information that's going on in-game through their notes, or perhaps specifically, I've had many players actually build a persona diary or journal. And therefore they record, on this day we face this monster, and I am working on developing an increased courage and reducing my fear of snakes. These mechanisms allow for the player to actually define for themselves the story that's being played through. And this concept of a diary or journal really does afford the player with a mechanism to follow their advancement. their development of that character. So, for example, if they had a fear of serpents, then now they can write down, yes, we faced a snake on the third day of the adventure, and although I was nervous and scared, I was able to overcome that, and we slew the serpent in so many terms or whatever. So there's a way to describe the action in terms that the persona would understand, which again will help bring you down to that eye level interaction with the game itself, and thereby give you the opportunity of really developing the character along its own path. This means you can take that interpretation and completely throw it out the window and instead say, I was scared out of my mind. I don't know what happened, but I hope someday that I can overcome this. These are all ways that the persona and the player sort of merge and interact so that there is a tangible, physical result of the game session that gives a depth to the character and makes you feel that persona's development over time. Another thing about, I was almost going to change screens, but another thing about journaling is that if you're running a long-term game, multiple episodes, maybe a saga, then the player's knowledge can become a backdrop or backstop as they reach other engagements. So, for example, they go, you describe a new monster to them, they go, oh, we faced that before. And if the game master challenges that, says, I don't recall when that was, they can go back and say, no, on this page we ran into a serpent. And even if it's not the same serpent, it may grant the game master the opportunity to embellish the story, to link that memory with what's going on now, which adds intensity. This is particularly useful when it comes to things like prophecies or projections of what might happen in the future. And if the persona has written it down in the journal that they were warned that a combat with the serpent would change their life, they may choose in this moment that this is that serpent action, and therefore add more gravitas to the engagement, which again expands their character development, widens the course of their course forward, and really is a very clever technique in terms of you as a game master, making you look like a genius because you interposed those concepts 3 months ago, and now they're coming to fruition. It really adds to the intensity of the game session when such things can happen. Which brings us to the next point. If you are a game master and you run one-shot adventures and you let people change characters week over week, most of what I'm recommending might seem like it doesn't match together, but if the characters are allowed to maintain week over week, then perhaps it does. And it also adds a continuity to your story in terms of perhaps what you will see in the future. The Nycos lore story that started clear back when I was 11 years old, and yes, that was decades, scores of decades ago now, and having the ability to link episode over episode does play into the conversation we had this morning about the advancement of your story and how you want to build your world. But the idea for the players is that a single session with a single character where they rotate characters week over week, much of this won't come in, so the player will have to do a lot more work to build in who that persona is from the get-go. And arguably, this is probably the only place where I'm ever going to say it, so don't tell my players, but if you've played role-play games from before and you carry forward ideas from them, the game master usually isn't going to be aware of that. And so it's a way for you to perhaps build into your worthiness or value to that game master if you're able to blow some depth and dimension into your character right from the get-go. And arguably that happens more quickly when you have to do it in one shot, so you do build your muscles. So one of the techniques for being better at the long-term saga games is to play consecutive sessions with a character that's the same, even as the story develops beyond them. Matter of fact, one of the great things that's going on is that one of the personas in my role-play roulette sessions is already, one of the players has decided that their persona is going to be a constant for them in each role-play roulette. So their character will be phasing through these memories. I believe what they're looking for in the long term is to become like a Highlander character who has lived through all these varieties of lives in different time frames and different periods. And so their personal growth as character building increases and expands so that they are better at running in campaigns. So although I don't often recommend it, session play one-shots are perfect for amplifying these initial muscles to build a character and to make a character developed over the session times. Now, I use these three terms to refer to the way people play. If you run session games, you're talking about one-shots. If you're running a series, it's usually 3 to 5 or more episodes that are directly associated with another to complete a story. And then finally, the sagas are the traditional cradle to grave story progression of the persona within that framework. And in each of the other two, series and saga, your skill will be improved because you'll be able to see that progression. Which means if you've already got the idea of for example, you decide that early on you want to have some kind of redemption arc, for example, you need to play off of memories and such that you build early on so that there's something that you can hang your hat on, so to speak, as you move towards your redemption. The more of that information you share with your storyteller, the more the storyteller is aware of or even helps you to amplify that, the better off and the more improved your game sessions will be, because the personas will be three-dimensional living, breathing beings when you're playing, and it won't be a group of characters on a piece of paper. It will be 4 or 5 individuals caught up in the drama of the specific scene you're in. Finally, and I put this at the last, so my players who have been with me for years, when you watch this video, if you will put your persona's name and a specific memory you have from one of our debrief sessions, you'll earn an extra BP in game. And those of you that are brand new to the system, the Blessing Points is a mechanism that allows you to modify dice rolls within the game session, both yours and mine, and therefore moderate how something might affect you. The more BPs you have, therefore, the more times you can adjust dice rolls. And they are basically once and done. Once you've utilized the BP, it is erased from your character sheet and so on. But what I'm going to talk about now is, I believe, very essential, especially if you are playing a series or a saga, because both you as the player need to debrief about what's happened within the character so you can kind of internalize the progression of your persona. Yes, the points only go up incrementally, 1 point per skill per session, so it's a slow process of advancement, but it's a constant system of advancement, and therefore by being able to debrief and bounce ideas off of the other players that are in the adventure or campaign or saga really does help. Now this also provides for the other side of this is feedback, and this is the information that's necessary for a game master to make sure he's doing an admirable job of bringing the personas towards their goals while maintaining the story elements that they need so that the story can progress. This is also when a player can, for example, suggest to a game master that they want to add let's say a hero's walk arc to their story, or they want to explore their backstory in a full episode coming up or whatever. And so therefore the game master can actually adjust and shift the story that he's telling in favor of this information he gets from the feedback. Absolutely critical. And so now as we finish up, before I close out, I need to ask you the question: what is it that you want from your role-playing games? Are you looking for a sheer mathematical advancement of characters to reach their paragon level at the optimal skill level points along the way to get the maximum benefits from an experience points based mechanism like Dungeons and Dragons? Or are you looking for a deeper, richer roleplay experience wherein you actually, even if you haven't advanced in terms of experience points and such, you nonetheless have developed more of an understanding of who your persona is, what does motivate them, what drives them in story, and therefore amplifies your play experience? My question to you, of course, is outside of these techniques that I've offered, and I'm going to refresh them all here. Beyond these points, if there's anything you can think of that I should include in this video, make sure you let me know in the comments section. If this is YouTube, that's be easy. For those of you that are watching on Facebook, our YouTube videos are at NycosRPG on YouTube. So youtube.com/@NycosRPG. You'll be able to find our, I think it's something like 700 plus videos. So there's a lot to look at. I wouldn't get overwhelmed by that. I would recommend that you check out the How to Play NycosRPG playlist. That's, like I said, about 18 videos, and each of them is somewhere in the range of a half an hour to an hour. I try not to pontificate too greatly and go into the multi-hour shows. And this episode will be going up onto YouTube here shortly. So if you are, as I said, a persona who has played, a person who has played in one of my game sessions, please give your persona name, your species, and your remembrances of how a feedback or debriefing session went. Even if it was an informal one, I'm really looking for people to feedback. And if you are a player who plays in anybody else's role-playing game, wherein you are utilizing 1, 2, or 10 of these, feel free to put a comment in there because I'd love to hear from you. I am Jonathan Alvin. This is NycosRPG. And I'm sorry, Donnie, but you don't seem to have a frame of reference here. Said it twice now. All right. Talk to you later. Have a great night.